Good to see you all here this morning. Good crowd. Scott's right. Singing was fantastic. I like it when we have good song leaders, men who can lead and help us with that. Excuse me. So, I don't know how many of you use the YouVersion Bible app. But I discovered through help from one of our members here that they have a section on their app of YouVersion called Events. And I posted the event link on my Facebook page as well as the church's private page and public page. And if you want to follow along with the sermon notes or anything like that, all you got to do is either click on that link or go to YouVersion and find events, and you should find Franklin Church of Christ. You should find a picture of this photo on there somewhere, and it has the scriptures and the sermon notes. And I guess if y'all want to follow along to see if I make a mistake, that's what it's there for. But I just wanted to make that option open to you as well. We're reaching out this year. We're reaching out, we're reaching up, we're reaching in, and then we're reaching out. And the whole idea is to understand what it means to rely on God, the Holy Spirit, the Bible, each other, so that when we do reach out, it is more effective, it is more uplifting, and it will make a difference in the lives of those who are in our towns, in our communities, in our homes. So this morning, if my clicker can work, this morning we're going to do our section on reaching in, using the talents of our congregation to carry out the good work that Christ called us to do. The theme of this, the theme of this section is it will be Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. If you would join me, let's read this verse together as a church. 2 are better than 1 because they have good return on their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. So, today we're going to reach in, and last Sunday we talked about reaching up to gather that perfect love, to connect with God, to understand that perfect love comes from Him, and now we're going to reach in to cultivate God's perfect love. Because I'm hoping that through this lesson this morning, we will discover that it takes all of us loving each other, understanding each other, putting up with each other, and doing more than just getting along and tolerating each other in order for us to be successful as a church body, as a body of believers, as the congregation of Christ. I want to tell you a story. Back when I was in Eastland as youth minister, I was the LTC coordinator for Darter Street Church of Christ. And we had all kinds of events. Our kids participated in all kinds of events. One of the events that we did, of course, like we do here, we did puppets. And our puppets were the ones that we had originally were they were just getting worn out. So we used some of the church money and we purchased new puppets. And the kids were really excited because these puppets were really, really new and they, fresh out of the box new. And so the day came when we were trying to pack up all of our stuff to get it ready to go to LTC in Fort Worth. And a bunch of adults, including my wife, were standing around in the puppet store area trying to figure out how we could pack all these puppets up into one tub or box so that we could transport them to Fort Worth. And every tub they bought from Walmart just wouldn't quite fit. Either too long, too short, too shallow, too deep, too big, everything else. Well, it just so happens that while they were trying to figure out this major problem, a little girl was standing beside, messing around in the puppet place where they were. I won't tell you her name, but her initials are Blan Chrane. So McKenna is standing there, and she's hearing all the adults saying, "How are we going to pack these puppets? What are we going to put these puppets in? This is going to be this is very difficult. This is challenging." And McKenna says, "Hey, what's that box right there?" And one of our deacons said, well, that's the box that the puppets came in. Y'all know where I'm going with this, right? McKenna says, well, why don't you just put the puppets back in the box they came in and take them? They quickly made her leave because they didn't want to get showed up by a little girl. Sometimes when we read our Bible, we can, make it difficult through ourselves. Sometimes we read something and we just let it in one ear and out the other, or however you want to paraphrase that. When the answer or the solution is right there in front of us, and you cannot move forward or backward until you have come to grasp with this concept. And the verses that we're going to look at in 1 John and John it's plain as the nose on your face. If we as a church body are going to be successful and do the work that God has called us to do, the first thing we have to do is we have to cultivate love. We have to cultivate love. We have to let it grow in us. We have to let it work in our body. And we have to make sure that it is done by everyone. Couple of things. The first thing I want to talk about this morning is how this kind of love that we're talking about, that was read this morning, is to be the same as the quality of love that Christ had. Christians loving each other is motivated by the overwhelming majesty of the love of God Himself. You remember I said last Sunday, everything God has done, we read about God, everything comes under an umbrella of God showing His awesome, amazing love. And that way, when we understand that, it also should be our motivation to do the same way. Everything we do, from our physical works to our spiritual works, to worshiping, to fellowshipping, to doing everything, should come under and should be driven by the attitude and the feeling of love. This sentiment should be deeply rooted into every Christian. And so then, this is what you think. I don't judge my spirituality by comparing myself with others. Instead, I compare it with Christ. Now, when we do this, we automatically understand that there's only one possible response, and that's, humility. I don't know if we can outlove God. Well, no, we can't outlove God. And I know we can't outlove Jesus. But Jesus made it quite clear, and John also makes it quite clear, that our loving one another is not a suggestion. 1 John chapter 4, it starts out by saying, God loved us, so we should love one another. There is no middle ground. This is the puppet box that the puppets go in, church. We love this love we are to have for one another is not optional. It is a required mark of the Christian. Now, if you want to see the command, then you got to go to John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. Jesus says, this is the command, a new command I give you, love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. Then he makes a very, very poignant statement that I didn't really think about or pay attention to, quite frankly, until I was working on this. He says, by this, all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, some people like to get all technical and say, preacher, Jesus was just talking to the 12 when he said that. And I don't know if that necessarily applies to the new church, because everything after the cross is what we're supposed to follow, and yada, etc., so on and so forth. I respectfully disagree. I respectfully disagree. If Jesus had said it to his disciples and they thought it was important, then they put it in there for us to read along as well. By this all men will know you are my disciples if you love one another. And to top it all off, he just got through doing something that nobody wanted to do. In that day and age, the lowest of the low, the brand new servant, the one who just got hired on, was given the job of washing feet. Feet that have been in open-toed sandals, walking around in the dust and the mud and everything else. Made out of leather, and many of us who have worn leather bracelets knows what happens when you start sweating on leather. It makes a lovely odor. And so now, because that wasn't done while they were at the Passover feast, Jesus, the teacher, the rabbi, stands up, changes his clothes on purpose, gets down and washes his disciples' feet. Now, here's the question. Well, Blan, does this mean we're going to have a foot washing fellowship next Sunday or something like that? No. Not everybody can wash feet. You know, some of us may not be good at washing feet. But my challenge for you to understand this morning is that what I mean by learning to wash feet is that you find within yourself what you are good at doing, what your talent lies, why you are motivated to be a part of this church, and you simply use it. By this all men will know you are my disciple has a physical attribute to it. I can tell my wife I love her all day long. But I also know that if I want to cherish and honor and support her and do the things that I'm called to as a husband, I have to do some physical things to show her that I love her as well. That's why when she takes out the trash, I say, "Good job, honey. I'm so proud of you." I'm joking. But you get the point I'm trying to make. Babies born in hospitals. Why do you think the first thing they do when that baby is born is take that baby, and after they clean it off, they put it on its mother's chest? Why? Because a very exciting, turbulent thing has just happened to this child. And this child doesn't know which way is up. But once it hears mama's heartbeat and picks up on mama's smell and hears daddy's voice, everything gets all back to normal. We can say we love each other till the cows come home. But sooner or later, the proof is going to be in the pudding. The Bible says, by your fruits you shall know them. I can say I love somebody, but if I don't show it, if I don't live it, if I don't back it up with action, I'm just talking out of my hat. Jesus spoke these words after he washed his disciples' feet. So, you need to learn how to wash feet. You need to learn what you can do. You need to find your way to show love. I know that sounds kind of weird, but, follow along with me. And until that time, this is what you also got to understand. Until that time, you've got to use what you got. You've got to use what you got. I remember growing up with my dad's ranch. If he needed a post hole dug, we got the post hole diggers. If he needed a fence stretched, you got the T-post and the little wire stretcher thing and everything else. And if you needed your field plowed, you got on a tractor that had no air conditioning and no radio. I know, but it's hot and muggy and everything else. But a funny thing happened after I graduated from high school and went on to college. Dad got the air conditioner and the radio fixed in the tractor. Dad got him a nice fancy fence builder's thing. I don't know what it's called, but it was easier to build fence. And to top it all off, Dad bought him an auger that he could hook up to the PTO, the back of the tractor, and drill post holes every so often. And I'm thinking, where was that when I was here? And Dad smiled and said, well, you were that when you were here. Dad used what he had. And that's the sign of anyone who's worked on a ranch or on a farm. Until you can get something better, or until you can make something work even more, you use what you got. And that's what Paul's trying to say here also. This, use what you got, is the answer to every lame, no good excuse we have on our part when we want to think or want to say, or some of us verbally say, oh, I just can't love that person. You don't know what he or she is like. If you had to be around him or her, you wouldn't love them. You couldn't be able to love them either. No. 1 John 4. Dear friends, since God loved us, if you have experienced, and I know some of you have, if you have experienced this kind of love, if you have been to the cross, if you have felt the overwhelming cleansing of God's love for you, you can do this despite the antagonism. You can do this despite the hatefulness you have shown Him, and you can despite your loving your own way and wanting to do what you like, if you have felt the cleansing grace of God that has taken away all the sins. John says, not only can you love someone else, but you ought to. You owe it. That is where the word ought comes from. You owe it to love one another. That is why Paul says in Romans chapter 1, I know it's not in the notes if you're following along, but bear with me. I know Paul says in Romans chapter 1, I am obligated, he says, to the Greeks and the non-Greeks. Translation, he is obligated to everyone. Romans 1, I owe something to everybody. And he himself said later in the same book, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. The only debt that you should have in your life is that you owe your love to someone else. In here, out there, everywhere. We owe it because God has within us the love and the life of God. Well, I don't know if I have that kind of love, Blan. Use what you got. Well, I don't know if I can verbally say it. Use what you got. I have a busy schedule. I don't have time. I'm sick. I'm mad. Hey, let me tell you something. You can love someone even when you're mad. I know it. Finally, I want you to go back to John chapter 4 and look at verse 12. 1 John 4, excuse me. 1 John 4, chapter 12. Verse 12 declares something that is quite an interesting concept. Verse 12 says that God is invisible and no person has ever seen Him. Now, we can get into the technicalities of what has happened in the Old Testament with folks like Abraham and Elijah and everything else. But my submission is this, that they haven't seen God in its entire form. Parts of Him. Parts that, a human eye of someone that looks like God. They understood who God was, but they haven't physically seen Him. God is invisible. So, no person, even in the Old Testament days, there appeared a manifestation of God in human form. But these were but God in human shapes. These manifestations. Now, I want you to understand this. John goes on to say, if we love one another, then God abides in us. We all believe that. We all want that. We all cherish that and appreciate that. And His love has made complete. That is, His love reaches its final end in us. Not the building, not the church, building church, but the congregation. Now, here's the kicker. That right there is where people will see God's love. And it is the only place it can be seen. In you. I'm glad Scott led, "Have you seen Jesus my Lord?" That fourth verse is very powerful. Have you ever stood in the family with the Lord there in your midst, seen the face of Christ on your brothers? Then I say you've seen Jesus my Lord. As long as we are nice, now I want you to understand something. As long as we are nice only to our friends, or to those who have been nice to us, no one will have any idea that God is around. When we start being loving to those who are nasty to us, who don't see theology the same way we see it, who don't think that, who may not agree with everything that's done here, but they still attend. When we start seeing that, then they will see God. Then others will see God. When we start being patient, when we start being tender, when we start being thoughtful and considerate to those who are stubborn, who are obstinate, who are selfish, when the people get that the sense of God is, then the people are going to get that the sense of God is close at hand, and that He is in the situation. Then God's dwelling has become visible to them. Now, I will back this up till I can't do it no more. This church is a loving church. And we take care of a lot of things. We take care of ourselves. We take care of the people around us. We are involved in the community. But this is something we can continually work on. And here's the reason why. Here's the reason why. Back in John chapter 35. Make sure that note's right. Back in John 13, 34 and 35. Jesus says, "By this all men will know that you were my disciples." And we understand part of it. But I want to throw something at you this morning this is what kind of made me get a little nervous. When Jesus said, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another," I want you to pay attention to think about this. Could it be that Jesus gave the world, the outside world, the authority to judge our Christianity by the love we have for one another? Let me ask this question again. Could it be that Jesus gave the world the authority to judge our Christianity by the love that we have for one another? Could it be that He gave the world the right to judge whether you and I are born-again Christians on the basis of our distinguishable love toward all of us? If that's the case, that's pretty frightening. This is a high calling. This is a challenge. Probably one of the greatest challenges that we could ever be a part of and face. But like I said, I know that we love. We are a loving congregation. We care for others. We care for people. But in the end, it's something that we can all still strive to work on and do better. This morning, if someone wants to respond to the invitation, the time is now. You need the prayers of the church. If you want to visit with our leadership, if you want to be baptized, right now, this is the time. Please come forward as we stand and as we sing.